everybody. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. As
Amira,
Peggy said,
let them know you're also a Federation member.
I am a Federation member, and I belong to, Doris's club is actually my home club that I belong to for years, but I belong to this club and many of the other clubs around our circuit. So thank you so much for having me. As Peg said, I am the Chief Assistant, which basically means I'm the right hand of State Attorney Steve Russell, and I help him around our very large circuit with the day-to-day operations. I don't want to block the screen. Is that okay if I stand here for everybody?
Sure.
Everybody see? All right, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about what the State Attorney does, what is that, and what is our judicial circuit. A lot of people approach me everywhere I go and say, oh, you work for Pam Bondi. Which we don't, because Pam Bondi is our Attorney General. She's a cabinet member and a separate elected official. In Florida, we have 20 elected state attorneys, completely separate from the Attorney General's office, although we work very closely together. So our circuit is down here at the bottom. This 20th circuit, you can see how big it is compared to all the other circuits in Florida. So one of the reasons for that is the 12th circuit here, which is Sarasota. We were formed out of that in 1969. As Florida grew, we became our own circuit. So we have the 20th circuit here, which is Lee, Collier, Hendry, Glades, and Charlotte counties. You see how big it is, you know how big Florida is. That covers 5,400 square miles. So our judicial circuit that we're responsible for as your prosecutors is bigger than the state of Connecticut and has more population than many of our states in our United States. So it's, I just wanted you to see how large it is as I go through some of the things we do on a day-to-day basis. There's our circuit population. I always like to tell everybody how big it is. We're over 6% of Florida's population at almost 1.3 million people. I know you all probably on the news in the last few days, but 1,000 people a day coming into Florida, they say. So that's a lot of people to absorb, but hopefully we will all be up to the task. There's our population increase just in our circuit from 2015, almost 25,000 people. And over the last 13 years, we are the third fastest growing circuit in the state of Florida, with an increase of almost 300,000 people. So that's a lot. We just keep on growing. Here's what we look like across the circuit to see, so you can see what really a big operation it is. This is Charlotte County, and that's our courthouse in Charlotte County. Beautiful courthouse right on the river. And sorry, that's the Charlotte population, 170,000 people in Charlotte County. So here's our Collier County courthouse, also beautiful, 350,000 people. Here's our Hendry and Glades. I always say this whenever I do a presentation, but if you haven't been out there to that rural part of our circuit, absolutely beautiful, old historic courthouses and really worth a visit to go and see them. They're absolutely gorgeous. Much smaller populations. We always joke that there are more cows in Glades County than there are humans, and I really think that's true. It is a very rural county. It's a lovely county. Hendry and Glades are some of my favorite places after being the office head out there in the late 90s. Really, really charming counties. But there's the populations, much smaller, 38,000 in Hendry, 13,000 people only in Glades County. And then here we have the center of our circuit, and people from other counties take exception, but we are by far, Lee County is by far the biggest in population. So there you have your Lee County Courthouse. That is only a small part of the Lee County Courthouse. That's in downtown Fort Myers. Next to that we have an older courthouse, an annex that houses all of the government offices that are associated with the courthouse, and also the jail for holding short-term prisoners or prisoners who have court is also downtown attached to this. So there's our Lee County population, much bigger than our other counties, almost topping out now at 700,000 people. Here's how we break down for the state attorney's office. We have 9 attorneys in Hendry and Glades County. 1 attorney of those is in Glades County all by himself, 1 judge, 1 small staff, and I always joke that he has the best position in the whole circuit. He's very independent. Interesting fact, Jonathan Martin, who's your RWC chair, who we love, was an assistant state attorney for many years, and when he was an assistant state attorney, he was the Glades County attorney. And every time I go to Glades County, people say, "Where's Jonathan?" I say, "I'm sorry, he doesn't work for us anymore." They love our attorney who's there now, but they miss Jonathan. He was very, very good and did an excellent job working in Glades. So even though he's not here, I wanted to give him a plug. Charlotte County, 19 attorneys, Collier County, 20 attorneys, and Lee County, 68 attorneys, which I'll explain why there's so many more, because it's not just because of population. Total state and county agency funding. We get a budget of about $25 million a year. About $22 million of that comes from the state of Florida, mostly through tax dollars. $3 million of that comes from our counties, because by law, the counties are responsible for providing agencies like ours and the public defender with their infrastructure dollars, meaning they have to give us a place to stay and to have our office. They provide our phone services, and they help us with some of our IT. So Lee County contributes almost $2 million to that. The smaller counties, such as Glades, it's more like 10,000. So a big difference in how much the different counties contribute to that part of our budget. 25 million probably, you're thinking, well, that's a lot of money. It's not when it's stretched across a huge, huge circuit of 5,400 square miles, 120 assistant state attorneys, so 120 prosecutors, and a staff of 300. So it's not as large as it seems. That covers everything. That has to cover the cost if a murder case goes to trial. That has to cover the cost of preparing the case for trial, flying witnesses in if they're out of town. And we all know Florida's transient. So we could have a murder that occurs, it goes to trial a year down the road, and every single witness is gone. Well, that budget pays for the travel of witnesses. How much does it cost to really put a trial on? It costs a lot of money. So it looks like a large budget, it's actually not, and we're pretty proud of the way we stretch it out, and we think we're really effective and efficient at it. So why so many attorneys in Lee County? Do we have that much crime in Lee County? No. And I'm going to tell you at the end of this presentation, we actually have a really, really good crime rate. Good, I can't say that, but lower compared to all of the other circuits in Florida. So here we go. Here's where we house in Lee County. In that building I just showed you downtown, we house all our specialty units for the state attorney's office. So we've decided over the years that it's very effective to take certain very experienced attorneys and make them specialty attorneys. What do I mean by that? Homicide cases. Who would want an attorney with 1 year of experience who's done only misdemeanor cases handling a homicide case where a loved one had been killed? Nobody would want that. We don't want that. No citizen wants that. So in our homicide unit, we actually have 8 very experienced, long-time attorneys who've been with our office a long time, and they handle all the homicides that occur throughout the circuit, and that includes traffic homicides. So DUI manslaughters, vehicular homicides, all of those are handled for the whole circuit out of our homicide unit. And it's located in Lee County, but they travel the entire circuit depending on where they're needed on a daily basis. As part of homicide, I always like to explain this because I think people are really interested in this. I'll come back to it, but I just wanted to just go over how many specialty divisions we have. We have an economic crime unit, handles any case over $20,000, theft, white collar crime, embezzlement, all of that is handled by them. They also handle all the elder fraud in our circuit. As we all know, we do have an elderly population within our circuit. That makes them very apt for victimization, and we actually have people and investigators who specialize in helping local law enforcement with taking down that type of crime. And it used to be many years ago that people would say, oh, you stole some money, you had a contract, it's civil. We try very hard to go the final, to put more stages into the investigation so that if it is criminal, we can prove it and take it to court. So we actually have 3 investigators working in our economic crime unit to help local law enforcement work the cases up. We have a post-conviction unit. What does that mean? That means that every single person who goes to prison does not want to be in prison, and they file a lot of motions from the law library with all their newfound lawyer friends in the law library at the prisons, demanding that they be let out because something went wrong with their case. There are some cases where something did go wrong with their case. We've had cases, and these are few and far between, but there are cases where we've discovered, for instance, a defense attorney was told there was an alibi witness, and they never went and talked to them and put the whole trial on without an alibi witness who really was an alibi witness and is later proven that the person didn't do it. So when an attorney is that poorly representing a client, those cases have to come back through the system. Like I said, those are few and far between. Most of the convictions stand and most of these motions don't go anywhere, but somebody has to answer them all. It takes 5 attorneys working the circuit to answer all the motions that we get the judges order us to answer and explain why the conviction shouldn't be overturned. So that's our post-conviction. Public records, we're an open state, we're a sunshine state. That's wonderful. Rita's nodding at me. The clerk's office knows, as I do, that it's wonderful to be an open state. We both embrace it. However, the amount of work it takes to redact a document before it goes out to the public. I'll give you an example. The Seavers murder cases here in Lee County. The Seavers murder cases, the paper would not fit within this room if we printed it all out. The amount of text messages going back and forth just between the family members is so large and so outrageous and inappropriate that the redaction takes. We have one assistant state attorney in our homicide unit who has stayed late pretty much every night for the last year trying to redact the Seavers case before it goes out to the media, because it's against a lot of release things you're not allowed to release. So people don't think about that type of thing when I put up the budget and I say, well, we have to do a lot. So when we get a big case like that, we have attorneys who have to sit, because it has to be done by an attorney who understands the law. What needs to come out of these documents before they go out? And the clerk's office is in the same boat as us. It's very, very difficult. It's excellent that we live in a sunshine state, but the agencies that do it have to properly, and we should, dedicate a lot of resources to it. We have a special victims unit. You all, this is I was gonna say, you hear a lot of things on TV about the criminal justice system and crime. A lot of them are not true. A lot of the TV crime shows are not realistic, believe it or not. We do not solve homicide cases in 1 hour. We just do not. I know it drives law enforcement crazy. My husband's a retired homicide detective from the Collier County Sheriff's Office, and it's really the bane of every prosecutor and cop's existence. You can help me with that too, James. That's what people come to expect, and it's just not realistic. But we do have an SVU staffed by very experienced attorneys and run by an attorney with 20 years of experience who travels the whole circuit, and they handle all the really horrendous crimes, the crimes against children, the sexual batteries against children, the capital sexual batteries that carry a mandatory life sentence. Those are the ones where a child 11 years of age or younger has been sexually abused. They handle the human trafficking cases, so they have a very tough job. It takes a special person to be able to do that job and show empathy and remain very, very tough in the system. I have the other things up. I don't want to dwell too long on any of them. We have firearms attorneys. Firearms attorneys have to have a certain amount of experience, and there's one for every judge's track in our circuit. So every circuit court judge has a firearms attorney, and that means you have to have a lot of experience as a felony attorney, and you have to understand the laws regarding firearms. You all have heard of 10-20 life, violent career criminals, habitual career criminals. All of those cases have to be studied, and then enhancements can be put on the defendants to make sure that they serve a longer sentence. So for instance, the firearms case goes to the firearms attorney on that particular docket. They look at it and they say, oh, the way this firearm was used, we can enhance it with a 10-20 life. That has to be filed a certain way. Certain statute numbers have to be on the information, and if they're not, the case can go down the tube. So we're really dedicated and careful about that to make sure that we capture all those extremely dangerous people who are using firearms in our community and try to get them the maximum sentence. A little bit different, but also keeping our community safe. We have all these things, and you're saying, oh my gosh, that's so much violent stuff. Well, we also have, on the other end of the spectrum, we do a lot of diversionary courts. So we take drug addicts, we take people who have mental health issues, which I know you all know about this. There's a lot of those in the criminal justice system. And we take people who are first-time offenders who have committed a non-violent crime, and we run them through diversionary programs where they can not become a convicted felon and they can come back into our community and be productive. And this is only with non-violent people. We also have drug and mental health courts where we actually put someone through a court system where it's a 2-year long with incredibly intensive treatment, very, very difficult to make it through, but when people do make it through, they usually come out clean, and they don't go through the constant cycle of offending, and which, by the way, is very bad for all of us, because drug addicts who go through the prison system and don't get clean, they come back out and guess what they do? They go burglarize somebody else's house. So we realized a long time ago that's a pretty bad cycle and does not keep our community safe. So we've tried very hard to recognize people who are suffering from addiction, non-violent. Let's not just keep sending them to prison. Let's send them through a very vigorous court program where they can hopefully get better and come back out and not re-victimize our communities. That's been very successful. The recidivism rate has been much lower over time than the people who are going through the revolving door of the prison without getting better. So in certain cases that's appropriate. We obviously do not put drug dealers into drug court because that would be not a good thing. That would ruin the entire drug court. I just want to go back to homicides a little bit and explain the grand jury process. Who's heard of grand juries? I know one person in here who has. I got to boast about her for a minute. So Frances, who's sitting here, shared with me a few months ago that she was on a grand jury, North Carolina. Frances was on a grand jury for 6 months.
A year.
So here's her handbook from 1985. We got to do some show and tell here. So it's very unusual to find a person who's actually sat on a seated year-long grand jury.
Wow.
And what a grand jury does is a grand jury decides whether or not there's probable cause in a case to bring charges. So when Frances did it, North Carolina was different. I don't know if it still is, but it was different from Florida. And anyone who wants show and tell, she's got a whole folder up here of pictures of her on the grand jury. It's very cool. Anyone who's on a grand jury in a state like North Carolina or New York State, every felony charge has to go through the grand jury. The prosecutor does not have the ability to just sign a charging document like we do. Every felony charge goes to the grand jury. So Frances, God bless you, Frances. So she sat on this grand jury for a year, and every felony that went through that jurisdiction, Frances heard it along with her fellow grand jurors and decided whether or not charges should be put into the system.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You decided whether or not charges should be put into the system.
That's right. We determined whether or not they would be indicted.
That's exactly right.
And we had Hell's Angels. Oh, we had the roughest angels.
Yeah. So, you know, most people go like this when they hear they have grand jury or they're going to be in a grand jury, and most people come out enjoying it and have stories for a whole lifetime. Now, we're a little different. Federal grand juries hear every case that goes through the federal system. In the federal system, a case can't be put in unless it goes through a grand jury. And New York is like that even on state crime. In the state of Florida, we don't operate our grand juries like that. I say we, it's by statute. Our law says that a grand jury is only required for charges to be brought in, I bet you can guess what charge it is. It's the most serious charge in the state of Florida, capital murder. So for our office to charge a capital murder case, we convene a grand jury, and that's 21 people. And the grand jury has to vote, and by majority, they have to find that there's enough to put a first-degree capital murder into the system. Why is that like that in Florida? Well, capital murder in Florida carries the death penalty. So the legislature has seen fit, and I totally agree with it. Look, when you're putting something like this in the system, this isn't going to be an individual prosecutor decision. This is going to be a body of citizens saying, yes, there's enough evidence to indict. Now, prosecutors, it's up to you to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So here in Lee County, we do keep an impaneled grand jury. So every January and every July, I impanel a grand jury in Lee County. And we keep them seated so that they're available if we need them to indict a first-degree murder. Because every other crime in Florida can be charged by a prosecutor just by signing a document. It's called an information. And it charges the person with a crime and puts them into the system to travel through the system. Grand jury listens to the case. It's nothing like a trial jury. We just bring in the detective, the medical examiner, the grand jury listens. They get to ask questions in a grand jury. Any of you ever been on a trial jury? Yeah, in a trial jury, you have to sit there and listen, and you're not allowed to ask questions. So a lot of the jurors get really frustrated because they're thinking, wait a minute, I want to know about that. And you don't get to know. In a grand jury, they get notebooks. They get to ask questions. We don't stop until every question's answered. So if a grand jury decides there's going to be an indictment, a first-degree murder comes out of it. There's time periods, which is why we keep one impaneled here in Lee. If a person's been in custody a certain amount of time and they're not charged, they get out of custody, which we don't ever want. If a person gets arrested and charges, and they don't waive what's called their right to a speedy trial, and it doesn't get to trial within 6 months, then the case is dismissed forever. So we work under all these time limits. In our other counties, we don't keep impaneled a grand jury. In Collier, Charlotte, Hendry, and Glades, we impanel them when we need them. I know it sounds bad that we need them that often in Lee County, but you're going to be happy to hear that our last term grand jury, we didn't use them at all. We impaneled them and we didn't use them. That happens many, many times. So this time we've impaneled, we used them on the day we impaneled to indict a case, and hopefully we won't use them again this term. So they always enjoy their service because we don't bring them in that often. So it's nice for them. They also hear sometimes special cases if we have a public corruption type of case, a police shooting. Sometimes we need a body of citizens to hear those types of cases. So on some occasions we use a grand jury for something else. Death penalty. How do we decide what cases we're going to seek the death penalty on? This is the most serious decision a prosecutor ever makes. A prosecutor on a daily basis makes really, really serious decisions. Even on the most lowly crime that you all would think of, this is a trespass. Well, the prosecutor looks at it and says, if I charge this person, their life is going to be altered forever. What if I don't charge this person and there's a victim? Their life is going to be altered forever. On a daily basis, the prosecutor has to weigh out what is the right thing to do. Is there enough evidence to charge the person? If there is, the person's going to probably get into the system and be charged. If there's not enough evidence to charge the person's probably not going into the system. But it's an incredibly powerful position. You charge someone with the stroke of a pen in every case except first-degree murder. So our prosecutors, we require them to be extremely thoughtful on what's going into the system and what's not, and to not put something in that then you're just going to lose down the road because you didn't have enough evidence to start with. So they're always really having to be very thoughtful about what they do. Along those lines, death penalty review. So who decides? Do we have our homicide attorney who decides this fits first-degree murder? Let's do it. Do they then say, okay, I'm going to seek the death penalty? No, that's not the way it works. So in my opinion, any responsible office in the state of Florida who's doing prosecution, and a lot of them run this way, have a death penalty review committee, where the most experienced people from throughout the circuit gather. The homicide attorney comes in and says, here's what I got, here's the facts of the case, here's what's aggravating about this case. Let me give you an example. Who's heard of Mr. Misak Damas down in Collier County? He has court tomorrow morning, so you'll see me on TV, and I'm sure that you will see him acting up like he always does in court. So he is charged with killing his wife and 5 children. He used one knife to do the killing of all 6 of them. My husband was the homicide lieutenant, actually, who responded to that scene 8 years ago. So it is set for trial the day after Labor Day. He's been declared incompetent several times. The death penalty went into flux in our state, as I'm sure you know. And we were not going to try Mr. Damas while there was no death penalty in place, because we are seeking the death penalty on Mr. Damas. So we had to wait until the death penalty settled in the last legislative session, and we're ready to go now. So death penalty review, who gets it? Why do they get it? Aggravating circumstances. We have to prove to a jury that there are aggravating circumstances that exist in a murder why somebody should get the death penalty. What's an aggravating circumstance? Here's an example of one. Heinous, atrocious, and cruel. That's the definition of what we'll be arguing in the Damas case. He used a knife, kids suffered, kids fought back. That's heinous, atrocious, and cruel. So that's an aggravator. Cold, calculated, and premeditated. Premeditated murder by itself is first-degree murder, but to seek the death penalty on the first-degree murder, the aggravator must exist, not must, but it should be one of the aggravators, cold, calculated, and premeditated. What does that mean? Well, premeditated murder can be, here it is, I see it, I'm giving you a very simple example. There's a mosquito on me, I want to kill it. Split-second decision, but it was premeditated. That's how simple premeditated murder can be. I'm not saying, that's probably too simplistic an example, but premeditation, there's no period of time. And that first-degree murder is either premeditated or a felony murder, where you commit a crime that's so atrocious and dangerous in itself, like an armed robbery, and somebody dies, that you're guilty of the murder if it happens. But for the aggravator of cold calculated, you can probably think of an example, a hitman. So in the Sievers case, we're seeking the death penalty on 2 of the defendants. So a hitman type of situation. A situation where somebody thought it out beforehand, went and got the materials to do the murder, for example, duct tape and electrical cords before they go to the house to do the murder. That's heightened premeditation. That's even more thought out. So those are the types of things that we talk about. We debate, we have a committee of 9 people, they present it, they say here's the aggravators, and they also present to us, what are the mitigators? Did the person from the time they were 5 years old, were they abused? Were they raped continuously? What's the mitigators, if any? because the jury later on will hear all those things. So then we weigh out, do the aggravators outweigh the mitigators, or in our opinion, do they? And if they do, the case goes to Mr. Russell if we recommend that we seek death, and then he has the final say, although I don't know of one time he didn't follow the committee's recommendation. So that's how that type of really serious decision, I always think people, well, how do you all decide that? That's how we decide it. And, you know, we now require in the state of Florida a unanimous verdict, not only for guilt in a first-degree murder, which of course that's what it should be, 12-0, 12 jurors required in first-degree murder, but now also a unanimous verdict as to whether each aggravating factor has been proven and whether as a whole the death penalty should be the sentence. So that may sound easy when you hear about really heinous cases, but there are some people who just firmly don't believe in the death penalty and they won't vote for it no matter what. So it's our responsibility to try to, in jury selection, select an appropriate jury for our cases. So that's how that works. I'll just, finishing up here, I'm going to take questions. Here's our caseloads. Going down a little bit, which is good news. In 2015, we handled 71,000 cases. In 2016, we handled 65,000 cases. So throughout, you can see we handle a lot of cases. But here's some really good things that I can tell you. 20th Circuit, as I showed you at the beginning, carved out of another circuit. 20th Circuit was also 20th in funding from the state for many, many years. That's the clerk's office, that's the public defender, that's the state attorney. Our current state attorney has been very successful in bringing us up, but we're still catching up. So we are the second lowest funded circuit per capita.